Imagine for a second just being forced to spy on your own life. Like you have to speak in code to your own kids.
Yeah.
You practice your beliefs in a locked, windowless basement. And the people who are relentlessly hunting you down, they aren't, foreign enemies on a distant battlefield. They are literally your next door neighbors.
It's terrifying.
Right. And for centuries, this wasn't just the plot of some thriller novel. It was the actual waking reality for thousands of people living this forced double life.
And it's a history that is, well, it's defined entirely by shadows. I mean, we usually look at history as this record of who built the biggest monuments, right? Or who won the largest battles.
Exactly, the big flashy stuff.
Right, but when you look at the people who survived by actively erasing their own footprints, you find this completely different historical landscape. It sort of forces you to reevaluate everything you thought you knew about, like survival and identity and power.
Well, welcome to this deep dive. Today we're exploring a stack of deeply intertwined sources that really just completely shattered the traditional two-sided view of history.
Yeah, they really do.
We're looking at Tamar Hersig's 2022 scholarly research on Mediterranean slavery, and we're putting that right alongside some incredibly raw, deeply personal newsletters from 1997.
Those were published by the Society for Crypto-Judaic Studies, right?
Exactly. So our mission for you today is to basically trace this hidden thread. We're going to uncover the brutal realities of Jewish female enslavement in early modern Italy, and then navigate the horrific, just engineered political traps of 15th century Portugal.
And we'll look at the psychological legacy of the people forced to hide their faith for centuries, whose descendants are actually still navigating this complex identity today.
So let's just jump right in. Let's start with 17th century Italy, specifically the port city of Livorno. When you read a standard textbook about early modern Mediterranean slavery, it's almost always painted as this bipolar conflict.
Right, a neat binary.
Exactly. You have Muslims capturing Christians and Christians capturing Muslims. It's just a neat binary struggle.
But Tamar Hersig's 2022 research takes that binary model and just, well, it breaks it apart completely.
How so?
By centering on a group, the historical record practically erased, enslaved female Jews. She focuses heavily on this specific, honestly horrifying event in 1610.
Yeah, this case is intense.
It is. A group of enslaved Jewish women from Tetuan were subjected to a multiple perpetrator sexual assault. But the detail that completely upends the traditional historical narrative is the identity of the perpetrators.
Oh, right.
They were Catholic convicts and Muslim slaves, and they were working together.
Which is wild, because going back to how we usually view history, it's like watching a chess match, right? Where we only talk about the black and white pieces fighting each other.
Yeah, ignoring everything else on the board.
Exactly. Completely ignoring a third group on the board that is being actively targeted by both sides simultaneously. But, I am looking at the details of this 1610 case, and the logic seems completely backward to me.
What do you mean?
Well, if the ultimate goal of kidnapping these women was to extract a massive ransom from Livorno's wealthy Jewish community, why inflict such horrific abuse? Right. I mean, doesn't that devalue the hostages in the eyes of the slavers?
You would think so, yeah.
Yeah.
If you look at it purely as, preserving an asset. But Hersig's research reveals the actual mechanism of extortion at play here.
Okay.
This wasn't random violence. It was a highly calculated business strategy, and it was instigated by a prominent Catholic slaver.
So it was deliberate.
Absolutely deliberate. The slavers understood that standard ransom negotiations could really drag on. The Jewish community would generally pay an accepted market rate for captives, and they'd negotiate.
Right.
So to break that slow negotiation, the slaver orchestrated this highly visible, just excessive abuse to send a brutal message to the male leaders of Livorno's affluent Jewish community.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, it was a terror premium. By weaponizing interethnic sexual violence, the slaver basically manufactured sheer panic. It forced the Jewish community to pay these exorbitant ransoms immediately just to stop the atrocities.
They engineered human suffering to drive up the price tag. That is a chilling look at the mechanics of early modern capitalism.
It's horrific, and it also reveals this profound, gendered, archival silencing.
Because no one talked about it.
Right. These Jewish women were largely erased from both Italian and Jewish historical narratives because, well, their specific suffering just didn't fit the neat stories either side wanted to tell about themselves.
That makes sense.
And on a broader scale, it proves that in Catholic Europe at the time, adhering to the Jewish faith, even if your broader community was wealthy and influential, It offered zero protection from the brutalities of enslavement.
Yeah, the wealth of Livorno's Jewish community didn't protect these women. It actually painted a target on their backs.
Exactly.
Which raises a massive question. How did these Jewish populations become so scattered, vulnerable, and displaced across the Mediterranean in the first place?
That is the big question.
And to understand the root of that vulnerability, we have to rewind about a century and look at the Iberian Peninsula.
Right, back to 1492.
Yes, Spain issues its infamous expulsion order in 1492. Tens of thousands of Jews flee. A massive number of them, maybe even half cross the border into neighboring Portugal. And on paper, it looks like King Juan II is rescuing them, like he opens the borders.
It definitely looked like a rescue, but it was actually a highly engineered financial trap.
A trap.
Yeah. King Juan II was gearing up for a war against the Moors in North Africa.
Yeah.
So he desperately needed the mechanical skills of the Jewish refugees for arms making. And he needed their wealth to finance his military campaigns. But he couldn't just confiscate it without violating the norms of royal diplomacy. So he created this system designed to make the refugees default on an impossible agreement.
A legally engineered default. Okay, so how did the trap actually work?
So permanent residence was only granted to a tiny fraction of the refugees,
Right.
like about 630 wealthy families.
Out of tens of thousands.
Right. And they had to pay this astronomical fee of 100 cruzados. For everyone else, the king offered an 8-month temporary visa for 8 cruzados, and he explicitly promised to provide shipping for them to leave the country when the 8 months were up.
Okay, so they had a way out.
Well, as that deadline approached, the promised ships miraculously failed to materialize.
Of course they did.
Yeah, the 8 months expired. The refugees were now technically in the country illegally?
Because the king deliberately withheld the transportation he promised them.
Precisely. And the penalty for overstaying this visa. The refugees were declared forfeit of their liberty. King Juan legally justified enslaving them and seizing all their remaining assets.
That is just, it's incredibly cynical. And the cruelty doesn't stop there. We get to 1493, and the source material details something deeply agonizing.
Yeah, this part is really hard to read.
We have accounts from historians describing a complete shattering of these people's mental and physical landscapes. The king literally tore Jewish children away from their enslaved parents and shipped them to the newly discovered remote African island of São Tomé.
Right on the equator. I mean, an entirely alien environment for them.
Yeah.
And the mechanism here is cultural eradication. By isolating these children on a remote island thousands of miles away, the crown intended to break the generational transmission of their faith and culture.
Right.
The goal was to populate the islands and have these children raised entirely as Christians, completely severed from their roots.
Okay, let's unpack this next part, though, because King Juan dies, and his cousin Manuel takes the throne.
Right, King Manuel.
Manuel comes in, looks at the situation, recognizes that these Jewish slaves are entirely guiltless, and actually restores their liberty. He even refuses a financial gift they offer him in gratitude.
He does.
So he looks like an enlightened monarch stepping in to fix his predecessor's cruelty. But then geopolitics gets in the way.
Always does.
He wants to solidify his claim to the throne by marrying Princess Isabel of Spain. But she demands he expel all the Jews from Portugal as a condition of the marriage. Manuel knows he can't afford to lose their wealth and their skills. So how does he solve this impossible geopolitical puzzle?
By creating an absolute demographic nightmare. He decides to force them to stay in Portugal, but to completely strip them of their Jewish identity by making them a Catholic by royal decree.
So forced conversion.
Yes. The climax of this strategy is the forced conversion in 1497, on Friday, March 19th, which cruelly happened to be the first day of Passover.
Oh, man.
Yeah. Parents were ordered to bring all children between the ages of 4 and 14 to Lisbon. The crown announced that the children would be taken away and given to Catholic families to be raised.
The sources describe scenes of sheer, unimaginable panic. Desperate parents smothering their own children in a farewell embrace or throwing them into wells, literally choosing death over surrendering them to apostasy.
The psychological terror was the point. Eventually, 20,000 Jews were herded into the Asis Dios courtyard in Lisbon.
What was that?
It was a palace usually used for grand diplomatic receptions, but they repurposed it as a holding pen. They were harangued by priests, kept under armed guard without food or water until the deadline to leave the country passed. Then they were told they were slaves once again. Finally, they were simply sprinkled with holy water and declared Christians by royal decree.
So King Manuel turns to Spain and says, look, there are no more Jews in Portugal, but I mean, you cannot just sprinkle water on a human being, pronounce them a different religion, and expect to erase their entire internal world.
You can't. And this is the exact moment the phenomenon of the crypto-Jew is born.
Go Anousim.
Right. They're also known as Moranos, or Anousim, which is a Hebrew word meaning the forced ones. Outwardly, they were Catholic. They went to Mass. They baptized their children. But internally, secretly, they maintained whatever fractured vestiges of Judaism they could manage behind closed doors.
The psychological toll of that existence is just staggering. Our sources include an essay by Jordan Elgrably called Echoes of Identity, which dives into the split personality forced upon the Anousim.
It's a great piece.
Yeah, Elgrably references the philosopher Yirmiyahu Yovel, who uses this fascinating term, the mascaroso, the masked Jew.
And for the mascaroso, language itself becomes a survival mechanism. It becomes a mask.
How do you mean?
Well, these individuals are locked in a constant state of doublespeak and dissimulation. Even when they are speaking the truth, it's wrapped in a layer of falsehood because they can never, ever safely express their subjective reality to the outside world.
Wow. It sounds a lot like modern digital code switching.
Kind of, yeah.
Like having a highly curated, perfectly acceptable public profile that complies with all the community guidelines, but using heavy peer-to-peer encryption to talk to your real friends about what you actually believe.
That's a good analogy.
Except in the 16th century, if your encryption fails, you don't get banned from a platform, you get burned at the stake.
Exactly. And that underlying threat of execution meant this double life wasn't just mental gymnastics. It often required extreme physical and geographical gymnastics.
Right.
Historian Thomas Glick refers to this as cultural commuting. The source material provides the incredible trajectory of a man named Jono Batista.
Oh, this guy's story is wild.
It really is. So he was born Christian in Lisbon. Then he traveled and was circumcised in Flanders. Then he lived openly as a Jew in Salonika, briefly lived as a Muslim in Sephardic, and finally ended his life as a Christian in Venice.
How does a person even manage that practically?
Right.
We aren't just talking about getting different passport stamps. That requires learning completely distinct cultural scripts, changing your diet, mastering new vocabularies, altering your resting behavior just to survive the border crossings of the early modern world.
It requires an exhausting level of hypervigilance. You are quite literally a spy in your own life.
A spy in your own life.
Yeah. Yovel notes that this existence created a life of constant mental ferment and upheaval. You're perpetually questioning your surroundings, your neighbors, and even your own identity. But this ambivalence, this profound fragmentation, actually becomes a powerful precursor to modern identity.
Because they had to question everything.
Exactly. The necessity of hiding brought about a heightened, critical perspective on religion and society.
But living that double life meant dealing with the omnipresent terror of the Inquisition, which ruthlessly hunted these hidden communities for centuries.
And the Inquisition wasn't just a court. It was a massive domestic surveillance apparatus.
Right. Yet, despite that fear, we see incredible acts of defiance in the archives. We have 17th century Inquisition records from Yecla, a city in Spain, and they reveal a very quiet, domestic form of defiance.
The Yecla records are amazing because they show us exactly how these secret traditions survived. And it was almost entirely through the matriarchs of the family.
The women.
Yes. With the public sphere, like the synagogue, the community square completely erased, religion retreated to the most private sphere possible. The kitchen and the home. Spaces controlled by women.
But the level of surveillance they lived under is terrifying. Like, you have Antonia Blandoa, who was denounced to the Inquisition by her own servant.
Yeah, her servant turned her in.
The servant noticed she was washing clothes on Fridays, lighting candles, and avoiding prohibited meats. So the Inquisition arrests Antonia, and under torture, she confesses that her mother taught her to return to Judaism.
Just for washing clothes on a Friday.
Right. You also have Leonor Enriquez, a widow who proudly declared to the inquisitors that she had practiced the law of Moses since she was 20 years old.
These women were the invisible architects of their culture's survival, just passing down these fragmented rituals behind drawn curtains. But when you look at the archives across the Atlantic, the defiance takes on a completely different volume.
Oh,
But
definitely.
look at Luis de Carvajal and Mozo in 16th century Mexico.
Yeah, Luis was the nephew of a governor, right? A man of culture and letters. And when he discovered his Jewish roots, he didn't retreat to the kitchen. He embraced it with a terrifying openness.
He really did.
He played the harp, he sang the psalms, he actively proselytized. So the Inquisition arrests him, throws him in a cell. And his response to being imprisoned by the most feared religious police force in the world is to convert his cellmate, who happens to be a Catholic monk, to Judaism.
It's just incredible. He fundamentally refused to wear the mask. He even changed his name to Joseph Lombroso, which translates to the Enlightened. He was fully aware that a second arrest by the Inquisition meant an automatic death sentence at the stake. But he wouldn't relent.
He knew what was coming.
He did. And when he was finally led to his execution, he debated his tormentors with such immense eloquence that Padre Contreras, the Catholic priest assigned to walk him to the flames, openly expressed deep admiration for Luis's profound and sensitive understanding of his faith.
Even the priest admired him. Our sources actually include a poem by Shulamith Halevi dedicated to Luis's martyrdom. And the essay attached to it points out a vital linguistic connection.
Oh, right, about the word martyrdom.
Yeah, the word martyrdom comes from the Greek root meaning to bear witness.
Whoa.
Luis wasn't just dying. By refusing to hide, he was forcing the entire colonial establishment to bear witness to an identity they were desperately trying to incinerate.
He made his existence undeniable. And Helvy's poem captures the endurance of that presence, suggesting that 400 years of oppression and flames cannot erase the seal of those cultural memories.
That instinct to hide, though, that generational reflex to keep secrets, it didn't just evaporate the moment the Inquisition officially disbanded. The psychological scars of that reflex carried over into the modern era. Which brings us to the descendants of these secret Jews today.
Fast forwarding quite a bit.
Yes, to the late 20th century. The Society for Crypto-Judaic Studies published a newsletter in 1997, and it features the first-hand account of Rufina Bernardetti da Silva Mausenbaum. Her Portuguese father fled rising anti-Semitism in Europe and moved to South Africa in 1936.
And she describes growing up in a home saturated with family secrets.
Exactly. The paranoia of the mascaroso was still alive in her living room in the 20th century. Outside the home, she went by her Italian middle name, Bernardetti. But inside the safety of the house, her father called her Rufina.
Telling her it meant Ruth.
Right, and that they came from a good family, which was their deeply ingrained code for a Jewish family.
She also shares a jarring detail about a protective strategy used by her ancestors.
Oh, this was fascinating.
Yeah, she was told that if they had remained in the old country, she would have been sent away to become a nun.
Which sounds completely contradictory.
It does sound contradictory. But a convent was actually the ultimate cover story for a crypto-Jewish woman.
Really?
Think about it. If you are a nun, you are shielded by the institution of the church itself. You are largely untouchable by the Inquisition's local spies. Plus, living in a convent gave these women direct access to the Old Testament.
Oh, wow.
Allowing them to read their own sacred texts under the guise of Christian devotion.
That is brilliant and tragic at the same time. Well, Rufina eventually decides she wants to stop hiding. As an adult, she wants to officially return to Orthodox Judaism. So she goes before the Beth Din, the Jewish Judicial Council, to have her status recognized.
And this is where the historical trauma comes rushing back into the present.
Yeah.
When Rufina sits down in front of the Beth Din, she finds herself facing a long table of stern, authoritative men firing questions at her, demanding she prove the validity of her identity.
It's so intense.
She realizes in that moment that the mechanics of this interrogation feel identical to what her ancestors faced in front of the Inquisition tribunals 500 years ago. She is being forced to prove herself to the very community her family was violently torn from.
It's a devastating parallel, and it exposes the immense, often painful friction within the modern Jewish community regarding the Anousim. Not everyone welcomes this reclamation with open arms.
No, they definitely don't.
And we want to be clear here, we aren't taking sides in this, we're just reporting what's in the sources. We have an anonymous letter sent to a researcher in 1997, included in these documents, that expresses intense, palpable anger toward modern crypto-Jews.
Right, and to understand the anger in that letter, you have to look at the mechanisms of survival for the mainstream Jewish community.
Okay.
Communities that survived pogroms and the Holocaust did so by building incredibly strict boundaries around their identity. When outsiders suddenly claim that same identity based on vague family habits, it can feel to some like an infringement.
Like cultural appropriation.
Exactly. The letter writer mocks the idea of $920 heritage tours to New Mexico, accusing participants of trampling on sacred graves. They criticize people who claim a Jewish identity simply because their family, quote, doesn't eat cheeseburgers.
Right. To the letter writer, they believe locals are just spinning tales to please researchers. But conversely, the newsletter also features voices urging the Anousim to stop waiting for mainstream validation.
Yeah, there is a powerful counter-argument in the sources that their heritage is a stolen possession.
Stolen in 1497.
Yes, the Inquisition stole it from them, and they have the inherent right to simply pick it back up without asking the Beth Din or anyone else for permission.
That specific emotional state being caught between two worlds is beautifully captured in a poem by Isabel Medina Sandoval called Marginal Threads.
That's a great poem.
She describes standing on the border, bound by jaded Jews judging my Judaism. It's this painful, exhausting state of being on the outside looking in and the inside looking out, asserting that the history belongs to her just as much as anyone else.
And when you look at the entirety of this history, the survival of the Anousim is one of the most incredible feats of endurance on record. I mean, we followed this thread from the erased, exploited women in Livorno whose suffering was used as economic leverage.
To the kidnapped children of San Tome, isolated on an island to break their culture, we saw the quiet, kitchen-bound defiance in Spain and the literal fires of martyrdom in Mexico. And we followed it all the way to the complex, fragmented identities of modern descendants fighting to reclaim their past in 1997.
It's a massive journey.
History isn't just a game of chess with black and white pieces moving in straight lines. It is largely defined by the hidden pieces, the people buried underneath the board fighting just to exist.
We often treat history as this academic exercise, something safely locked in the archives and entirely separate from our modern lives. But the legacy of the Anousim forces us to look inward. It asks a deeply personal question about the mechanics of identity and memory and survival.
Think about your own family's quirks for a minute. The unwritten rules you instinctively follow, the strange recipes passed down through generations, or the specific traditions you participate in without ever really knowing the origin. How much of what you confidently consider your true self today was actually forged by the desperate secrets your ancestors were forced to keep just to survive?